Howdy, it's me, and today I'm really pleased to present a review of a very interesting new lens from Tamron that's got a lot of people talking, their 70 to 180mm f2.8 Di III VXD. It's an autofocus telephoto zoom lens without image stabilization, which is currently only for Sony's E-mount mirrorless cameras, full frame or APS-C. I really hope that Canon and Nikon's mirrorless systems will open up to third-party manufacturers too soon. I'd like to thank Tamron UK for loaning me a copy of this lens for testing for a couple of weeks, although as usual this is a totally independent review. It's about $1,200 US or about £1,200 here in the UK, so not a cheap lens by any means, but also a lot less expensive than your typical 70 to 200mm f2.8. And as you can see here, its unique selling point is the advantage of being far smaller and lighter than an f2.8 lens that ends at 200mm. At only 800 grams or so, it's a very easy and inconspicuous lens to carry around with you, but also one that has major potential, as an f2.8 telephoto zoom lens is normally the heaviest workhorse of a professional photographer's kit bag, offering decently fast shutter speeds, nicely out of focus backgrounds, and a flexible zoom range, bringing you in nice and close to the action. Now, the build quality of this lens is best described as being mid-range. It's a simple lens made of plastic, but it actually feels quite solid and works very well. It's all based on a metal lens mount with a weather sealing gasket. Then there comes a plastic focus ring which turns very smoothly. It works very responsively with the lens's focus motor. As you can see here, the lens doesn't display much focus breathing, zooming in just a little as you focus more closely, which is much better than if it zoomed out. I'm kind of losing track of all the different names Tamron offer for their autofocus motors. In this case, VXD stands for Voice Coil Extreme Torque Drive, apparently. On my older camera body it worked silently, fairly accurately, and reasonably quickly. On a newer camera body it'll almost certainly be a bit quicker than this. Then comes the zoom ring. It's rubberized and works evenly, but it's a little bit sticky in use. You won't be getting any smooth zooming shots as you're video making. It also has a lock switch, but that's pretty superfluous I think. The zoom action is firm enough for zoom creep not to be a problem. As you can see, the lens extends just over an inch as you zoom in. It comes with a decently sized plastic hood, and the lens's filter size is 67mm. As I mentioned before, it does not have image stabilization, although if your camera has in-body stabilization, then that won't be so much of an issue. Overall, while the lens is quite a simple object, it works fine and its build quality feels nice and solid for a lower budget option. It just works without getting in your way. Now onto image quality. I'll start by testing on a full frame camera, my trusty Sony a7R II with its 42 megapixel sensor. In-camera corrections are turned on for this test. At 70mm and f2.8 we see excellent resolution and very good contrast straight away in the middle of the image. The image corners are a little softer but still good. Sharpness in the corners stays the same as you stop down to f5.6, but stop down to f8 for a little improvement, with the corners now looking great. Let's zoom in a little to 120mm. At f2.8, the middle of the image remains really nice and sharp with good contrast. There's just a little purple fringing here at that brightest aperture, although I can tell you it goes away at f4. Now let's look over in the corners. They are a bit sharper than they were at 70mm, looking very good this time straight from f2.8. As you stop down to f8, they get just a tiny bit sharper, but only a tiny bit. And finally, let's zoom all the way into 180mm. At f2.8, there's good news as the lens remains impressively sharp in the middle with good contrast and this time no colour fringing. Again, the corners are a little softer at f2.8 but still decent enough. Stop down to f4, f5.6 and f8 for a series of minuscule improvements that lead to excellent sharpness in the corners. As you would expect, if you stop down to f16, then some softness begins to emerge due to diffraction. Overall though, it's a very solid performance from this Tamron lens on a high resolution full frame camera. In fact, there are no real weak spots here at all, as it's always very sharp with good contrast. If you want the very best sharpness in the image corners, just stop down a little bit. Well, that was the performance on a full frame camera. How about on APS-C? Here I'm mounting it onto my Sony a5100 with its 24 megapixel APS-C sensor. It's generally the same performance as full frame here. At 70mm and f2.8 we see excellent sharpness in the middle, and it's just a little softer in the corners, although you only need to stop down to f4 or f5.6 to see excellent image quality emerging there. At 120mm, the middle is just a bit softer now at f2.8, but still very good. The corners are holding out very well too. Stop down to f4 or f5.6 and those corners become excellent, as does the middle, as you can see here. And finally, let's zoom all the way into 180mm. At f2.8, sharpness in the middle is better than at 120mm, but in the corners it's a little worse. Stop down to f5.6 to see excellent sharpness from corner to corner now, and again, it's only really at f16 that the lens gets any softer due to diffraction. So this is really pleasing. I thought the lens's performance might deteriorate on the slightly more demanding APS-C sensor, but sharpness and contrast are holding out here very nicely. This lens would be a good option for people shooting on Sony's crop sensor cameras too. Well, let's now take a look at distortion and vignetting on a full frame camera. These pictures are taken without in-camera corrections. At 70mm, we see just a tiny pinch of barrel distortion, but nothing much really, and very little vignetting, even at f2.8. Zoom into 80mm and that distortion completely straightens out. At 100mm it flips into pincushion distortion, and at 180mm that distortion gets strong and a little darkness is visible in the corners at f2.8. Stop down to f4 or f5.6 to at least see that vignetting go away. So the lens is displaying slightly stronger distortion than normal, but a little less vignetting. Leaving your in-camera corrections on is of course my recommendation. Now this lens has a secret feature. If you shoot at the widest angle of 70mm, it offers an amazingly close minimum focus distance of only 27cm, an excellent macro capability there. At f2.8, contrast completely bottoms out. At f4 it looks a little better, and at f5.6, close-up sharpness and contrast both look excellent. So this lens has an awesome macro capability, but you'll want to stop down to f5.6 to really take advantage of it. Now let's see how this lens works against bright lights. Its performance is okay. We do see some flaring and glaring whether you're zoomed in or out, but it's fairly gentle. And finally, bokeh. How does this lens render its out of focus backgrounds? They are averagely smooth. Sometimes those backgrounds can look a little busy, but actually they're not too distracting. So then, overall, the Tamron 70 to 180mm f2.8 seems to deserve the good reviews it's received on the internet so far. It is sharp with good contrast, it's easy to handle and relatively small and light. It's very useful and has a neat macro feature which lets you get fantastically close to your subjects. You just can't argue with all of that, really. It's not a cheap lens in absolute terms, but it certainly is good value for money because it offers you something a little bit unique. It's just a very neat piece of kit and it comes highly recommended. Thank you for watching. Do you find these reviews useful? I'll let you in on a secret. I absolutely love making them, and it's so satisfying to know that they help so many people to make their purchasing choices. These lenses are not cheap. If you'd like to support the work I do and get some exclusive special videos every month, then check out my Patreon page. For $3 a month you get all kinds of exclusive content for my supporters, which I also really enjoy putting together. Ciao for now.